the presentation. Then there will also be an opportunity for us to answer those as well. So the first question is, yes, you will receive continuing education units for attending today. The way that that will work is at the end of the presentation, there'll be a few things. A link will be emailed to you. If you probably give us like half an hour-ish to an hour after the presentation for that email to go out. The system takes a little bit. The link will also be in the chat, and then ideally, your browser should just populate a new page for you to take a survey. Upon the completion of that survey, your CEU certificate should be automatically sent to you. Again, that could just take a few minutes. So if you finish that survey and it doesn't come into your inbox right away, make sure that you've checked your spam folders or your junk folders and just give it a couple minutes. And then if you don't receive that CEU certificate, or if for some reason you're not able to access the link to the survey, I know that at times we have issues based on some of the firewalls that different businesses put on their computers, then you can just email myself or Brittany directly, and we will get you connected with the survey and a certificate. So that's kind of the first piece of housekeeping. Second, this is recorded today, so about an hour after this presentation ends, you will get an email that has both a link to a PDF of all the slides we're sharing today. So you'll have those, as well as a link to the recording. So if you needed to go back and watch anything. I do want to go ahead and state, I know all of you that are here with us now are here live, but I also know that because we're sharing the recording, there tends to be some confusion. We are unable to offer continuing education units for watching the recording. So if you had a coworker, or if one of our other webinars maybe wanted to just watch the recording, that is absolutely something you can do for your own education, but we cannot offer you a continuing education certificate for that. So you do have to participate live today in order to receive that certificate. I believe that once you've kind of logged on and you're here, then it should be fine and you should be able to access that certificate. The only other thing that I want to talk about housekeeping wise, unless there's any other questions, is just that this is one of a two-part series. You do not have to attend both parts in order to get the continuing education units, but there is a lot more information that's going to be covered next Tuesday, same time next Tuesday. Today we're really focused on like, what is adolescent screen usage looking like, and how is this affecting adolescent mental health and the shaping of an adolescent's identity, and where cyberbullying and schools kind of come in. Next week, we're really going to talk about how do you build a positive digital identity? What are the risks that those working with kids or caregivers need to know about technology use in adolescence? And then also really getting into what are some good strategies that we can share with caregivers of adolescents or those who are in adolescents' lives regularly to help them build healthy relationships with technology, and to ensure that technology has a positive role in our life and is not negatively impacting our mental and physical health and well-being. So just a plug for next week, if you aren't registered for that training and you're available to do so, it really will kind of wrap up everything we're talking today and make things feel a little bit more kind of concluded and pulled together. I'm looking at some of the questions just to make sure. Brittany, are you able to make sure they can get the link to sign up for next week if they're not registered yet?
Yes, I'm going to pull it now and put it in the chat. And yes,
Perfect.
it is a free training next week.
Yes, always free. So awesome. She'll take care of that. It's also on the Camber Mental Health website if for some reason you missed that link. And so today we'll be able to use the Q&A for questions. We don't have polls and interactions today. We just have a lot of information to get through. But we would love for you guys to ask questions throughout the presentation. So please type in the chat. Brittany is here solely to monitor our chat and make sure that technologically things work for us. And so any question you put in there, she'll interrupt to make sure that it gets asked at a relevant time in the presentation, or if she knows the answer, she might just answer if it's something more related to like the logistics of the training. So feel free to use that. I know I see some people raising their hands. That's not a feature that we're going to be answering questions through today, just because of the sheer number of people on this training. So if you can direct those to the Q&A chat, that would be perfect. And then Brittany will take care of you. Okay, without further ado though, we're going to hop in so that we can get through our material. So again, today we're talking about screen stress and self-image, and kind of going through what our youth are facing today. My name is Alexandra Beineman, and I go by Alex, so you can call me Alex. And I am the Senior Director of Program Innovation and Staff Development for Camber Mental Health. And a little bit about Camber, if you're unaware, is we are a hospital and PRTF health system here in the state of Kansas, as well as soon to be the state of Missouri. And so we operate inpatient psychiatric hospitals for youth and adults, primarily youth, some adults, and then residentials, all youth, in multiple locations throughout the state of Kansas. We're in Hayes, we're in Wichita, we're in Kansas City, we're in Olathe, and then next December we'll be opening a new location, both youth acute residential and acute hospitalization in St. Louis in partnership with St. Louis Children's Hospital. Our Olathe location is a joint venture with Children's Mercy Hospital. And so our focus is really kind of on those higher level acute kiddos and those more crisis-centered needs, or those kind of chronic struggles where residential is really needed to reach some sort of stability. So that's the populations that we serve. And one of the things that and I'm going to let Bethany talk a little bit about this, but when we go to decide these webinar topics, we do it a few different ways. So we do it a lot based on the survey you guys are going to take at the end of this presentation. So please, if you have ideas on things you want presented in the future, please let us know. We definitely try to only pick things that we feel as though we can speak as experts on. So sometimes we do get really good suggestions. They're just not areas that we feel as though it would be adequate for us to be the expert in that, or to say that we have that kind of knowledge. So if you ever feel like your ideas aren't taken into consideration, that might be why. But secondly, we talk to our clinicians and we talk to our treatment providers about what are the trending struggles that are being faced. We also talk to all of our employees as caregivers. Hey, what are you seeing in your children? Like, what are happening in their peer groups, and try to find the things that are most relevant to the time. And so Bethany is the one that kind of helped us come up with this topic for this year. And I'll let you kind of introduce yourself, Bethany, and talk about how we landed here.
Hi, so I'm Bethany Nold. I just go by Bethany, and I'm the program development coordinator for Camber Children's Mental Health. And so what that means is that I'm over all of the activities and like the things we do on our therapeutic milieu. So our resilience curriculum, the things that we instill in both our employees and our patients, just making sure that those needs are met and our staff are providing a secure and learning space for our patients. And I, prior to this position, was a clinician at our Kansas City location for 8 years. So I have a lot of experience serving the populations that we're going to talk about, and consulting with like my colleagues and my peers. Technology just continues to come up. I think unfortunately we used to have standards for technology that were developed previously with what technology looked like at that time in mind. And because that has changed, we're having to like reevaluate that. And so that's something that we're going to talk about, like what does screen time mean? Screen time was originally coined as a term for like TV watching. So yeah, we just need to, we want to provide a good update for all of
and everything is much more nuanced now. And so we're going to get into all of those nuances and how things are so individualized, and what we can, as individuals who work with, as providers, as individuals who work with kids, as individuals who work with families, or who are consistently coming in contact with children and families, what we can do to advise them, to educate them, what we need to be aware of, etc., as it relates to this topic. Okay, so our key points for today are going to be looking at the link between tech use, stress, and mental health challenges. And we're going to talk about how social media shapes identity and self-image, or kind of as a part of the identity and self-image shaping, especially in the adolescent age. So we're going to talk about tech use kind of in general, but we're really focused on like 13 to 17, 18, 19-year-olds with the content that we're discussing today and next week. We're also going to talk about strategies for navigating online safety and responding to cyberbullying. Today we'll be more focused on cyberbullying. We have a lot of online safety content to cover next week, and we really wanted to do a deep dive into cyberbullying because I feel like it is a very hot topic right now. I know that we just had a Netflix just put out a documentary, which granted was a little bit of a unique situation, but it's really putting a lot of highlights on how frequently these things are happening. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from that documentary, Unknown Number, if you've seen it, was that the daughter did not tell anybody that this was happening to her for 12 months. And so that was something that I was like, regardless of the ending of that, wow, like you really dealt with this on your own for 12 months before you ever thought to seek assistance with it. And so we're going to kind of talk about cyberbullying and things to look out for. So hopefully, if those are experiences that kids are having or participating in, that we can intervene a lot earlier. And then lastly, we're going to kind of start talking about the challenges schools face in promoting healthy tech life balance and being a part of tech life balance strategies. It's really hard because technology does provide us so many positive and innovative opportunities. And so where do we need to pull back, and how can schools help us do that? And how can they also help, ensure that we're building healthy habits within our adolescents for prolonged technology use? So jumping right on in here, we are going to be looking at some statistics and really just understanding like what's happening with our adolescents. And so the first thing that we want to touch on today is that according to a study done by the Pew Research Center in 2022, we report that 95% of teens in the United States have access to a digital device that they can access the internet with. So the vast majority of our teenagers either have access to a laptop, smartphone, tablet, something along those lines that they can regularly access the internet on. Another kind of interesting tidbit of information is that during the early pandemic, we saw screen time jump from about an hour 0.75, so an hour and 3/4 per day more. And since the kind of I don't know, I don't want to say end of the pandemic, but kind of since we've returned to more mainstream practices, that has only decreased somewhat. We're still seeing that increase at about 1.11 hours per day. Now, you could say, that has been 5 years, and we would see a continued increase in technology use because of the advancements in technology, and I'm sure that does play into it. But I do think that there were some habits and different patterns built during that time, which were very needed and very beneficial for society during that time to stay connected, to be able to be productive. But we are seeing that kind of overall increase. So some other interesting information here is that nearly all teens in 2022 have access to a smartphone, and that's up from 73% in 2014 and 2015. So that is a pretty big difference if you think about the number of teens that are in this country. Seeing that jump from 73 to 95. You're not seeing as big of a jump when it comes to desktops or laptop computers. That's, just a 3% increase, and we're not really seeing any increase or anything that's super statistically significant with gaming consoles. So it really is that smartphone that we're seeing that in. And I feel like, as someone who just engages in the internet regularly, and also is someone in their early 30s with peers, with children, and just kind of things going on, the conversation around when kids should have phones, how kids should have phones, how to let your child access the internet is definitely something that's happening. It's a part of my everyday life conversations with peers. It's definitely a part of my professional conversations. And so I'm hoping that this is really relevant to all of the individuals that everyone is working with. So when we think about technology use, especially when we think about the negative effects of technology use, our mind immediately goes to social media, because we know that social media is often where a lot of that cyberbullying is taking place. We know that there's a lot of risks kind of with the self-image and identity formation with social media. But it's also important that we understand the impact that technology has in our life without social media. And so this data is from Mental Health America. It's a survey that was conducted this year in 2025. They surveyed 2,600 individuals, and this is a range of ages. So some of these were children and some of them were adults. And they really wanted to look at what they're using technology for outside of social media. So this is outside of TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Threads, whatever else the world is doing that I'm unaware of, because I'm a little bit out of date in that. And so what was interesting is that individuals in young adults, so under 18 and 18 to 25-ish, really is where we saw the majority of their technology use being for entertainment. They are accessing technology for entertainment. They're reading on technology. They are doing like hobbies and fun things on technology. They are engaging in artistic things. Again, this is outside of social media, so that's why I'm listing these things. Obviously, they're probably engaging in social media as well. And then we really see kind of as the population ages, where that technology is used for more informational purposes. And I'm going to come back to this when we talk about schools and technology use, and how maybe schools can leverage technology a little bit differently to be more about information and less as just kind of an add-on. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the presentation today. Another kind of interesting statistic that came out of this study was reliance on technology. So you can pretty much see that up until age 55, so this orange bar here, more than 50% of people are saying that they feel reliant on technology, whereas less are saying that they don't feel reliant on technology. And this additional survey gleaned that only 44% report that they do nothing to minimize the negative impact of technology. So it is not something they're actively thinking about. It's not something they're worried about. And so only about 66% of people are doing anything to negatively or to positively impact themselves, knowing that technology does kind of have effects. So let's add social media back into the chat. So this is from a 2024 Pew Research Center study, and you can kind of look at the trends in social media use, and this is just ages 13 to 17 over time. And so you can see that back in 2014, 2015, they started studying, Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, X, or what has previously been known as Twitter, and then up starting in 2022 and then here in 2024 we saw Threads added. They kind of added some of those more emerging and upcoming different social media platforms. And something that I think is really interesting is that we've seen an increase gradually in Instagram. Snapchat had an increase and then kind of dropped off a little bit. TikTok kind of had a slight decrease. But overall, since 2022, which is just a couple years post-pandemic, things have stayed decently steady. We're not seeing any crazy large changes, but we are seeing an influx in the number of apps people are using. WhatsApp did go up, which I thought was really interesting, and I wanted to touch on today. WhatsApp is if you're not familiar with WhatsApp, it's a messaging app where you can message, make video calls to people based in Wi-Fi. So it allows us to communicate across the globe without being on the same cellular networks. Obviously, there's a lot of ways to do that, but this is one of the most used apps for that. And I do think that's interesting. We're going to talk about the positives of technology and the connection that technology can foster. And so I just think that that's one of those things where it would be really interesting to study the increase of WhatsApp alone and see if there's some trending reasons that are maybe positive as to why we're seeing more that have more positive impacts. Looking over onto the right side, you can see that this is the consistency or the frequency of which individuals are saying they use specific different social media apps or media apps. And so we can see that most of these, for the vast majority of people, are being used several times a day. 39% of people are saying they use YouTube several times a day. TikTok is 34% of people. And then there is a good chunk, about 15% of people saying they're using YouTube almost constantly, and 16% saying they're using TikTok almost constantly. And the TikTok is really interesting to me because of the type of videos that it is and the type of short form content that it is. And just how easy it is to get into a place where it becomes your background noise even, or you're just kind of scrolling and you lose track of time and those types of things. So this is really interesting, and I think it's interesting when we start to talk about the mental health effects to look at those several times a day or constantly using users. And the last bit of data that we're really going to dive into is this is really interesting data also taken from the 2022 Pew Research study, or sorry, 2024 Pew Research study. And this breaks different social media use down by demographics. And so you can see this broken down by male and female gender, by race, ethnicity, age, geographic location, income. And I have stared at this data for quite a while, and there's nothing like that I would overly say we need to take away from it, other than maybe just looking at if you know that there's a population or multiple populations that you regularly work with, understanding where they're putting their time and attention. We know that this is likely happening because different social media platforms provide different types of representation for individuals, or different information, or different entertainment. And so people are more likely to engage in different platforms that do that. I also think that when you're talking about 13 to 17, there's probably some impact on this data based on what people have access to. I know that you might not allow a 13-year-old to have access to all of the different things that a 17-year-old might have access to. And so I do want to say that that could potentially impact some of these numbers in terms of not just like interest, but what they're actually able to access. But overall, I find this research really interesting. Bethany, I know that you were fascinated by this. If you don't have anything to add, that's okay, but I did want to give you the opportunity.
I think these apps, they each use a different form of communication. You know, there's long form storytelling, there's short form storytelling. YouTube and TikTok both use different forms of storytelling, and they also use a different type of communication. So like high context communication, where we require a lot of details, a lot of graphics, a lot of expression. Youth tend to use like high context communication. And if you look at like the use of Snapchat, Snapchat is ephemeral. It can disappear, so it's not permanent, but it also allows like a wide range of like ways to add little, advancements to your expression when you're communicating. And with like low context communication, those are like a direct messaging app that maybe doesn't have the filters or all the extra things. And so some of these populations, from a cultural standpoint, I know like in America, when I was doing this research, like we are generally a low context culture, but Hispanic and African American communities tend to be more high context in like certain situations. And so I found that really interesting when we look at like the way of which people communicate in these apps and like what they're trying to communicate.
Yeah, I think that that's really interesting. I know we're going to talk about, and when we talk about cyberbullying, all of those contextual clues as well. And that's another, we can touch back on that then. And so that's kind of the status of where we are as a country when it comes to our adolescent digital use, whether that's social media or non-social media. And we know that it has negative effects on our mental health, on our physical health. I think that's something that has been screamed from the rooftops. It's been a part of a lot of articles. It's been part of a lot of information kind of giving opportunities, but we're going to kind of get into why it affects mental health. And so we're going to watch a short video here if everything goes the way it's supposed to and this plays correctly. Please let us know in the chat if you are having issues hearing this.
Of the 7 billion people on Earth, roughly 6 billion own a cell phone, which is pretty shocking given that only 4.5 billion have access to a working toilet. So how are these popular gadgets changing your body and brain? If you're looking down at your phone right now, your spine angle is equivalent to that of an 8-year-old child sitting on your neck, which is fairly significant considering people spend an average of 4.7 hours a day looking at their phone. This, combined with the length of time spent in front of computers, has led to an increase in the prevalence of myopia or nearsightedness in North America. In the 1970s, about 1/4 of the population had myopia, where today nearly half do, and in some parts of Asia, 80 to 90% of the population is now nearsighted. And it can be hard to put your phone down. Take for example the game Candy Crush. As you play the game, you achieve small goals, causing your brain to be rewarded with little bursts of dopamine, and eventually you're rewarded in the game with new content. This novelty also gives little bursts of dopamine and together create what is known as a compulsion loop, which just happens to be the same loop responsible for the behaviors associated with nicotine or cocaine. Our brains are hardwired to make us novelty seeking, and this is why apps on our phones are designed to constantly provide us with new content, making them hard to put down. As a result, 93% of young people aged 18 to 29 report using their smartphone as a tool to avoid boredom, as opposed to other activities like reading a book or engaging with people around them. This has created a new term, nomophobia, the fear or anxiety of being without your phone. We also see a change in brain patterns. Alpha rhythms are commonly associated with wakeful relaxation, like when your mind wanders off, whereas gamma waves are associated with conscious attentiveness. And experiments have shown that when a cell phone is transmitting, say during a phone call, the power of these alpha waves is significantly boosted, meaning phone transmissions can literally change the way your brain functions. Your smartphone can also disrupt your sleep. The screen emits a blue light which has been shown to alter our circadian rhythms, diminishing the time spent in deep sleep, which is linked to the development of diabetes, cancer, and obesity. Studies have shown that people who read on their smartphone at night have a harder time falling asleep and produce less melatonin, a hormone responsible for the regulation of sleep-wake cycles. Harvard Medical School advises the last 2 to 3 hours before bed be technology-free, so pick up a book before bed instead. Of course, smartphones also completely change our ability to access information, most notably in poor and minority populations. 7% of Americans are entirely dependent on smartphones for their access to the internet. A 2014 study found that the majority of smartphone owners use their phone for online banking, to look up medical information, and searching for jobs. So while phones are in no way exclusively bad and have been part of a positive change in the world, there's no denying that they are changing us. But many successful people have now decided to take smartphone vacations in order to increase productivity. In our new ASAP Thought video, we break down the top 6 reasons you should take a smartphone vacation and how it could benefit your life right now. And subscribe for more weekly science videos.
So we're actually going to talk about smartphone vacations and those types of things next week. But it is a good idea, and there's a lot of different things out there that you can do to kind of prevent yourself from accessing certain apps or your smartphone in general. I know I see a lot of people talk about like the brick, which makes it difficult for you to open an app and things like that at different times of day. So I think what is important in that context is the awareness that it's something that you need to be doing. And again, we had 44% of people report that they're doing nothing to mitigate the negative impacts of technology. So what is it doing to our mental health? That video kind of helped us understand exactly how it's changing our brain function, our brain waves, and what that dopamine reward system loop looks like. But what are we seeing? And what we're really seeing is a lot of techno stress, a lot of lack of motivation and creativity. We're seeing addictions, sleep disturbances, which were touched on, and then also can then negatively impact mental health. We're seeing decreased concentration and isolation, as well as touch deprivation. We're also seeing some pretty big increases in anxiety and depression, and we're going to have those statistics a little bit towards the end of those who are on their screens, especially in adolescence, quite often. And then also not to mention the negative mental health effects if you do become a victim of cyberbullying, or really just it's in here as increased stress, but being consistently exposed to the news, to the information of what's going on in this world when it can be so negative, does have kind of a secondary trauma impact on individuals, and especially on children who maybe don't have a full understanding of all the context of that, or who aren't developmentally in a place where they have all the skills necessary to manage that, or who are just getting it too often. I'm an adult who has a lot of skills, and I still have to put the news away regularly. So those are some of the more mental health specific, or like kind of mental and mental health and kind of brain specific things that we're seeing. And then there's a lot of physical health things that we're seeing too. We're seeing that excessive screen time has been linked to poor posture, to headaches, to physical inactivity. He talked about, I think it's so interesting that if you're looking at your phone right now, it's the equivalent of an 8-year-old sitting on your neck. That image will never, I'm like immediately was like, okay, sit up straight, Alex. That image will never get out of my head after seeing that video for the first time a few weeks ago. And then again, headaches, physical inactivity. So just overall sedentariness, not moving around as much, not being interested in physical activity, not finding physical activity entertaining. And then eye strain linked to computer vision syndrome, which can include things like eye fatigue, dry eyes, blurred vision, frequent headaches, double vision, light sensitivity, watery eyes, neck and shoulder pain. We're clearly, from the information from the video, seeing a significant increase in nearsightedness. And so there are a lot of impacts that are regularly happening to the population because of technology use. And if that technology use is starting in adolescence, we are exacerbating some of those effects and the time that some of those effects have to take. And I think before we move on, it's important, because this is all the negative stuff, right? Like, we know that there are bad mental health effects. We know that these are the physical health effects, but there are a lot of positives. And we're about to talk about screen time. And when we get into screen time, we're going to talk about those positives, and you'll be able to see some of that. Brittany?
Yeah, we just had a couple of quick
Yeah.
questions. One, and I just wanted to ask before we got too far ahead
For
of this,
sure.
but is there any information on usage on apps like Discord or online gaming that people use to chat with others? I know a lot of teens are on Discord to chat.
Yeah. So we're going to talk specifically about Discord next week, but also that, I mean, we're about to talk about screen time and what makes screen time quality. And so what is the content of that chat? What is the other life context of that individual? Is that a positive connection? And so we'll get a little bit more into that, but yes, we can talk more specifically about that. But I know you said there was a couple questions, so before I move on,
Yeah, awesome. And then the next question was, are the dangers of sex sortation, or sexploitation, or I'm not sure what word that means, going to be addressed, or is that for a different training?
we will kind of touch on that next week as well. So next
Okay.
week, we're going to dive into all of those like significant risk factors, red flags for sex trafficking, sexploitation. The only kind of major negative impact we're discussing today is cyberbullying, or really
Okay.
just diving into the mental health stuff. So all of that other content should be covered next week.
Okay, one last one.
Yeah.
Any research that you all have found on kids under 13 utilizing these apps?
So we haven't found any research, or I didn't come across any specific research directed towards the effects, but we are about to talk about screen time by age. And so I think we can have a little bit of a conversation of what that might look like. Bethany, do you have anything to add? I know we've kind of talked about developmental levels as it pertains to screen usage and
Yeah, so we'll talk a little bit about like how this stuff impacts like child development. I will tell you a lot of the research when I was looking over this stuff, most of it just, notes how vulnerable those 13 and under youth are to some of these situations, like the apps you're discussing, like Discord. We know Discord brings groups of people together over a common interest to chat. But some of these other like gaming platforms unfortunately offer a chat feature where you don't have to play the game. And so anything like that, that's a lot of the information is unfortunately very focused on risk and not necessarily
yeah.
Insightful directive feedback per se.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's pop into that kind of conversation about screen time. And so when we think about screen time, we also didn't think about these set numbers. And so the American Academy of Pediatrics used to have a strict 2-hour daily limit for screen time kind of period, especially for kids ages 2 to 5. And the World Health Organization was saying less than 1 hour for ages 2 to 5. And again, Bethany kind of mentioned this when she was doing her intro, but a lot of these pre-recommendations were based on TV because that was the main media that especially kids this age had access to. But now that we've seen technology change, some of these recommendations have changed. And when we look at older kids, so this graphic kind of does a really good job. This is from the American Academy of Pediatrics, but does a really good job of kind of breaking it down by age. But really, there aren't anything super specific for kids over 6. So whoever is talking about kids under 13, I think this is an interesting point to make. What we really want to start focusing on at age 6 is the quality of the screen time, the habits we're building around screen time and balancing those within our lifestyle, and really just kind of looking at like what is needed. Because I think what we found pretty quickly is that, or what they discovered pretty quickly is that your life these days sometimes requires someone to be online for more than 2 hours a day. And so then how do you mitigate all of those other areas? So when we're talking about screen time now, like I said, they really used to be focused on TV and movies. Now we're talking about that. We're talking about schoolwork. We're talking about family and friend connections. That's FaceTime, texting, being, technology does break down the barrier of proximity and space. And so connections via whatever that may look like, messaging, again, FaceTiming, etc. Games, so whether that's gaming consoles or games on your phone, like Candy Crush. I know that I know a few adolescents who are like obsessed with Brawl Stars and some other different games. And then we're also looking at social media. We're looking at entertainment videos. So that might be more YouTube. It could be TikTok. But we're also looking at reading and news. Like I am someone who exclusively reads on my Kindle just because I read at night when it's dark. And so it's just easier to read. I started reading on my Kindle as a way to reduce my screen time, which I realize sounds kind of ironic, but I don't pick up my phone like an hour before bed. I do pick up my Kindle, but in my head, that's still a little bit of an improvement. I don't know that for sure. And then also learning hobbies. And I think that this is really interesting because there's a lot of things that can be done either with technology or learned from technology. And so now that we're looking kind of at this more robust understanding of what technology is, then you can kind of start to get into like, what is quality? And some of the rationales for these changes, so why the American Academy of Pediatrics and the World Health Organization started to make these changes in 2016, really had to do with the increased access to screens. Knowing that they're at school, they're at home, activities require them. Not all screen time is equal. So again, like there are benefits to video chatting with a family member you don't see, more so than there might be from scrolling. And then again, like connection, watching and playing together builds relationships. And so is a family watching a movie together and having family movie night as equal to a teenager kind of doom scrolling on TikTok or engaging in like excessive Snapchat messaging with their friends? And so they started to realize that all of these things become more nuanced. There's also, you know, a lot of acknowledgement of the potential benefits of interactive and educational media when it's used in moderation, when there's parental involvement. Again, it's really striving to focus on that balance of healthy lifestyle. So next we'll look at, what does that mean? And so I think that this is hard. The first thing that I think came to my mind, at least when I was looking through this, was, so does quantity not matter at all? If we're focused on quality, does quantity not matter? And that's not exactly true. There is a lot of research that connects quantity to mental health issues. So we can see that one study found that teens who spent more than 5 hours a day on their devices were 70% more likely to report suicidal thoughts than those who use them for less than an hour a day. The CDC has some research that was conducted between July 2021 and December 2023, where about 1 in 4 teens ages 12 to 17 who spent 4 or more hours a day on screens reported anxiety at a 21.7% rating and frequency, and a depression at a 25.9% frequency. In comparison to teens who reported less than 1 hour, we're looking at more like a 12.3 rate of anxiety and a 9.5% rate of depression. So there is a link between time and these mental health issues and these struggles. The other piece of that is that quality. So maybe that quality tech time is not having such a negative impact as the less quality tech time. So what makes tech time quality? And that is incredibly personal. That is really, it depends on the person. It depends on the media, how they use the media, where they are in their identity development and their social skill development, and the way that they process emotions and the way that they think. And so it really is something that should be kind of monitored for each child and done for each child in kind of different plans. It's not a one size fits all approach, but things that would be considered positive would be things like mental health and well-being. Kids who are engaging in meditation or calming or mindfulness apps, or maybe that is their only way to access treatment and providers and care, that can be something that's really positive. Social connection for those who, especially those who struggle to be accepted in their immediate social circles or who have a lack of social connection in their lives. This can be really positive. I know that this always comes up when we talk about the LGBTQIA plus community, especially in rural areas, because sometimes the internet is the only way for these individuals to feel as though they have a community to connect to. Also, like healthy entertainment and balance. We all seek entertainment. Entertainment keeps a lot of joy in our lives, and as long as it's in moderation and it's positive, there is nothing wrong with a child seeking healthy entertainment as long as it stays balanced. And then again, creativity and expression. Maybe we are learning how to do new things, learning new crafts or skills, or maybe we're writing online, or we are, making music or doing those other things. And that would be considered screen time because we are using screens, but it's more of a creative and healthy expression. And then again, educational use. So those are some of the things that really help us identify what that quality time is. And so when you're talking about those ages, about those kids ages 6 and up, this is what we're looking for, especially ages 13 and up.
All right, so we're gonna kind of switch gears and dive into the neuroscience behind how our technology use impacts our brain. So we know that dopamine is the chemical that makes us feel like there's a reward, right? And it helps reinforce habits. Dopamine is how people take up smoking, eating extra sugar, all those things lead back to dopamine. And so we know that screen-based activities like social media or gaming can stimulate the brain's dopamine reward system. And what this does is creates like a feedback loop, right? So you look, we have the stimulus, the release, the desire for more, and then the habit formation. And so then on the outside, you see the stimulus, like is the distraction, we get the pleasure, we desire more, which reinforces that, and then that leads back up to our addiction, right? And so excessive screen time has been linked to reduced functioning in the region of the brain tied towards reward processing, which is the caudate nucleus, which you can see right there. And so we have discussed the differentiation between quality screen time is not simply like, it's not cut and dry, right? And we also know that the research does show that the misuse of technology, and quality and non-quality screen time can affect our mental health. So if we look at the negative impacts, one way that we can monitor the use is, focusing on the quality, like Alex said. And so that involves teaching our adolescents to build healthy technology habits. So I know, time and time again from working as a clinician that I would have parents be like, well, they're on their screen all the time. That's all they want to do. And if we really broke that down and we looked at the neuroscience, we would probably see that that was a habit that was unintentionally reinforced by their parent or modeled by their parent. And so if we look at the science behind technology's effect on our brains, we know with each interaction, so like someone mentioned in the chat earlier, a notification or an in-game reward delivers a brief rush of dopamine. And then as that effect fades, we are, seeking it back out because the good feelings and the desire for more and the pleasure have reinforced that, which kind of keeps us clicking. It keeps us scrolling. It keeps us wanting more. So one thing that I found that was fascinating when I was doing this research, was that logistically, our brains are not wired to keep up with the algorithm. Like from a scientific standpoint, our brains were not meant to be able to do this. So to keep up with the constant consumption of the virtual world and our external world, the comparisons between the two, it's very overwhelming. And we've all done that, right? We've all looked at, the online comparisons where we see people that we perceive to be doing very well or have the ideal situation, that leads to us feeling very inadequate or even depressed because it's reinforcing that perception that other people have things really figured out. And that ties in to what, experts call learned helplessness. And so learned helplessness, is the inability of us to keep everything straight, right? To be able to keep up with our demands and to be able to meet our objectives. So because digital media provides us with such a vast array of access and information, it also provides us to a lot of negative exposure. So you don't often see the stories repeated over and over again being about positive things. Usually somebody was harmed, something terrible happened, somebody was victimized. And so this constant stream of distressing content makes us feel very helpless and very drained. And so from being drained from, ingesting that content, we lose our motivation to tackle the day-to-day challenges in our lives. Things that would normally be easy for us, attainable, achievable, suddenly become very overwhelming because we just don't feel like we have control. And if you look at this loop, we get the reinforcement and then it's constantly being reinforced. So then we can't escape it. And then that leads to those feelings of panic and fear and anxiety. And that, then these negative and traumatic experiences happen. And so it's really important, to remember that the algorithm is designed to inundate us with information. And by design, also inundate you with the best version of everything. No one wants to look at the worst version, so that by science, that it's the best version of everything. And that, even though we're aware of that, it still impacts our self-esteem. And, so as we like dive into screens and self-esteem, like I said, the algorithm is designed to create a cycle of exposure of the perfect versions of things. And we know that there's a multitude of factors that influence the development of self-esteem. Parents' responsiveness, socioeconomic status, our familial relationships, peer comparisons, gender, race, temperament, and now added to this list is media and screen time access. So we know as children grow and form their identities based on the information they absorb from their surroundings, peer experiences are critical for helping kids relate. I found it so fascinating, and we'll talk about this in a later slide, that our comparison of ourselves to others is actually a really powerful part of our development. And kids naturally make these comparisons as they seek to establish like their place within their peer groups. And they have a profound need, not just a desire, but a profound need for acceptance and belonging. And unfortunately, when we're looking, they're searching for that acceptance and belonging, we start to make comparisons that can be toxic. And there's a lot of information that shows that girls in particular tend to have stronger reactions to peer feedback and social comparisons. And when we apply this concept to social media or the digital space, it's clear the algorithm is designed to connect us with, like I said, the best version, the ideal. And what this does, however, is it puts these teens at risk of comparing themselves and seeking out these things that are just not biologically capable to be, achieved. They just cannot achieve what they're seeking. And so on this,
Yeah, I think it's also interesting, like parental responsiveness being on here, because I think what we also see a lot of the times, like you said, when we were looking at the addiction, is that a lot of those things would be role modeled behavior. Are we not getting parental responsiveness because as parents, we are also completely addicted to our devices and we are completely not disengaged with our kids? Like we're there, we're watching, we're looking, but are we not responding to them in the way that we could be, or in as high quality of a way, because we are also struggling with this? So they're in the process of developing their own identity and self-esteem, and we're impacting that because of our own struggles with our relationship with technology.
yeah. And in another slide, I'll talk about I think it was the blank face phenomenon, which is that preoccupied face that we see our parents have and that we have when someone's talking to us and we're engaged in our phone. And like I said, I didn't realize just how much our animated and engaged responses were so impactful on kids when we're interacting with them.
Just a couple of questions before you guys move on. Someone was asking about if we could post these statistics that you guys were sharing somewhere. They would really love to hear and see, or not hear them, but see them somewhere. A question was, someone is curious about smaller kids playing video games and being on YouTube. So I think they were just curious to learn more about younger kids. And then another person said New York State is what I'm assuming NYS stands for, Anika. Bans cell phones and internet-enabled devices like smartwatches unless it's in a student's IEP or 504. Help students focus and be less distracted on screens, although many are on Chromebooks during the day in classes. So
I'll kind of go backwards on the question. So that's what I was gonna say, is I actually just saw someone talking about this. But which their joke was kind of, for those of us who remember like AOL chat, but their joke was like, oh, kids have reinvented AOL chat. They're using live Google Docs to chat in class because they don't have access to their phones or smartwatches, which is essentially like what we were all doing. So, I mean, I think that I was going to kind of talk about some of the school cell phone bans when we talk about school, but I do think that that's a positive thing. I think the things that we can do to reduce the distraction in those times is really important. I think that, again, it comes down to the quality. So whoever was talking about younger kids with video games and YouTube, what are we watching? Are we watching it with parents? What are we playing? Are we playing it with parents? So I think that actually one of our marketing and communications directors was talking about, like, she's like, I don't love to play video games, but I play Minecraft with my child because it's a time for us to connect. It's an activity they want to do. They're bought into doing it, and it's time for us to connect. And so I don't know that it's a very black and white answer. I don't know that we have any hard statistics for that population, but I really do think it comes down to what is the intent behind the screen time? Is it to distract them, to keep them out of your business, to give them something to do alone, or is it to foster connection, to teach them something new, etc.?
And Moana said that the state of Missouri has also banned all personal communicable devices in schools by law, smartphones, smartwatches, music players. So thank you, Mohana, for sharing that.
Yeah. Bethany, were you going to add?
I know, yeah, I know it's hard to not have like really good concrete guidelines for us to reference. And so I think, when I'm looking at if somebody were to ask me about the younger ages, honestly, I just go back to like the slide I just talked about with, if the information is telling us that this is incredibly addictive for a developed adult, then it's going to be the same for a child, right? And so just to keep that in the back of our minds when we're trying to support people and guide them, if it's hard on an adult, imagine what it's doing to a developmenting brain, and that's, I mean, that's pretty profound.
Yeah, absolutely.
And someone had just also made a comment very similar, Bethany, that when they were talking about the therapeutic relationship and why it's so powerful, and how when an adult comes into our office, right, that experience of us being engaged and not having that still face is really healing. So
I love that shout out. That's a really good point.
Someone said even when they ban things, kids are smart and still find ways to get on the internet. So they are smarter than us.
Yeah, 100%. And that's natural. Like that's a natural kind of like teenage inclination, is to figure out a way around it. That will never stop.
Yeah, and when we've researched, the situation that the schools are dealing with. I mean, the schools are not necessarily equipped for the level of technology that's been thrust in their faces either. They can't keep up with the kids either, and the firewalls and the protections. I mean, the kids are defeating them too. They're defeating the professionals, not just their parents. So when we go back to screens and self-esteem, I found social comparison theory to be incredibly relevant because, like I said previously, comparison is a part of child development, right? Kids, they learn from their parents, and then once they haven't developed the awareness of peers, then they start reaching to their peers to make those connections. And social comparison theory was developed by Leon Festinger, and he identified 3 types of social comparison, but for our purposes, these 2, the first 2 are the most relevant. So we have upward social comparison, which is when we compare ourselves to a situation or someone we perceive as better, and then as a result, we may feel a little inferior, like, I really wish I was in shape like this other person, and then we take that to motivate us to do better, to try harder. So the graphic, my classmate gets A's on their test and I'm really jealous, but I know they study a lot, so I probably need to study. So social comparison in an upward fashion, where we're using it to propel us to make a positive change or, implement a growth mindset, is a healthy social comparison. Downward social comparison is when we are comparing ourselves to people we believe are inferior, so we feel superior. So when you're like, well, man, it could be worse. I could be homeless, it must suck to be homeless. And so sometimes that can be okay, if we turn it to gratitude. So like I am really grateful that I'm not unhoused, that I have resources at my disposal, that I am supported, But we can also turn that into the negative, and just say that the unhoused person deserves it. They're lazy, they're not doing what they need to do to get out of that situation. And that's just an example. But we know again that this social comparison theory is how we, evaluate our achievements and our abilities and our goals. And we continue to do this. We do this as adults. And what we found is that in the digital space, because of the algorithm that gives us the idealized image and version of all of the things that we're interested in, it makes it really difficult. And like I said before, sometimes we're comparing ourselves to situations that aren't actually real, right? Or not actually feasible to achieve.
Or aren't whole.
Yeah.
Like we're just getting bits and pieces of a circumstance that we believe to be the entire story.
Yeah. And this, so everything that I learned about social comparison said that, oftentimes parents want to be like, well, don't compare yourself to other people, right? Which isn't necessarily like the best response, which I found to be really fascinating. Um, a lot of the information that I was, digesting when I was working on this project was telling me more to focus on making it an upward comparison. So when you're talking with someone and you're addressing a situation where social comparison is coming up, how can we turn it into an upward comparison? So that we're using it to motivate ourselves and not to feel down, because social comparison doesn't have to be a negative thing. Like I said, it's, focusing on upward growth. And so when we're supporting youth that are navigating this, it's crucial that we're reiterating that positive social comparison is the best way to go about this. And to view others as inspiration rather than competition, which I thought was a fascinating, lens to look through this at. If we look at someone as inspiration as opposed to competition, and we have to create supportive environments where growth and learning are emphasized to mitigate the adverse effects of social comparison. So when you're working with developing children, knowing that this is going to happen and not diverting your energy towards trying to extinguish the attempts at comparison, but rather using it in an upward sense as opposed to a downward sense, which is going to be a lot of work and a lot easier said than done when we're supporting youth that are online, in the digital space. Because again, like Alex said, they're getting a snapshot of something that's not whole, that's logistically improbable, but it still feels very real, and it is consistently reinforced to them in their consumption. And so, as we dive into our social media and the role of identity formation, James Marcia described identity formation as a process shaped by levels of exploration, trying out different values, beliefs, or goals, or commitment, and the degree of personal investment in them. And so a good example of this, is when you have your kiddo comes home and they're like, well, I don't want to go to church anymore, or I don't like this food anymore. I learned about this, if you've ever had a kid come to you and say they're, dabbling in being a vegetarian, or they don't want to go, I've had a lot of parents in sessions express, being upset that kids, previously liked to go to church and they don't want to go. And so James Marcia built this model from Erik Erikson's theory of psychosocial development. And so he had these four statuses of identity. And so identity moratorium, which is when adolescents are experiencing identity status known as the identity moratorium, or delay in making commitments about important questions. So they're not, making any specific commitments. They're not definitively saying this or that. And then identity diffusion, is when we're starting to search for meaning. Still not necessarily committed, but searching for meaning. And so that's where we see them dabbling in new interests. And then identity foreclosure is when we're trying to make a commitment, and shut out, other possibilities. So I feel this way about this, and that's that. So that's when we would be like, I'm never eating meat again. I've committed to it, right? And then identity achievement is that self-actualization, where we've coped with the crises arrived from exploring these different options, and we've reached a level of commitment to our occupational direction and made decisions about their key life questions. So that's kind of that self-actualization. And so this is kind of further broken down as it relates to social media and screen time. And what we found is that social media can prolong and intensify identity diffusion. So if we look at, what that is, they don't really know, but they're not quite yet ready to explore. And I think it's probably in part due to the level of content they're being hit with, right?
I also
And so
apologize that when
oh,
formatting this slide, put these in the wrong order. I just realized that. I apologize.
it's okay. So with so many identity options and pressures for comparison, oftentimes people feel overwhelmed. And so that leads to that indecision or avoidance when it comes to like making those personal commitments. And then we know the curated nature of online profiles can also promote surface level exploration. So not really meaningful, that inauthentic, like maybe I'm into this, I'm not quite sure. And so again, additional information and experience is making it harder for them to develop a clear, committed sense of self. And then in the moratorium phase, that's when our youth are exploring their identity through those social interactions. And while the digital world is expanding access to social connections, these interactions are often like not depth. They don't have the good depth. They're less genuine. They may be more generic, and they may be less like truly impactful or pro-social just because of the frequency, the comments and the brief responses that are just responding to the content and not necessarily a genuine dialogue back and forth, because you can communicate online without having to have a dialogue back and forth. Whereas it'd be really weird in person if you're just like, and then you said like to somebody and then walked off. You know what I mean? Like the internet and the digital space kind of gives us the opportunity to have more frequent, less genuine interactions. And then when we look at foreclosure, again, due to the curated nature of social media, identity foreclosure and achievement can be influenced in ways that discourage the exploration of alternatives. So once we've gotten the reinforced, not necessarily authentic example, this ideal identity, it's really hard to look beyond that because you feel like you've reached, this is the ideal form. And so this limits the critical thinking that is needed and is intensified by the pressure to conform. So when adolescents are committing to an identity without a thoughtful reflection in order to fit in, they may later find that their digitally shaped identity conflicts with the expectations of their parents, offline communities, or cultural backgrounds. And I've seen this a lot, with kids that are struggling to be pro-social in person, but also can tell me I am a completely different person online with my friends. It's because it's unfortunately kind of caused them to fracture. And then there's two versions of themselves, and it's really hard to bring those versions back together. And this just emphasizes like the importance of like development and identity achievement. And so we know identity achievement is based on the idealized content, which can hinder self-expression, leading to a weakened sense of self. So the lack of solid identity may put individuals at risk of being mistreated or entering unsafe interpersonal situations. And so interpersonal safety is one of Camber's resilience domains that we really focus on. And if you look at the desire to be connected and, to be whole, that really trumps reality and rational behavior at times. And so this can make a person have an unstable foundation, and that can lead them to be vulnerable to bullying and exploitation. A recent study focused on minority populations, again through the Pew Research Center, found that some populations gravitate towards more like certain, more platforms than others because the curated content is giving them access to representation or personally relevant connections. So Black and Hispanic teens in this study reported higher internet use than white teens, with 56 and 55% reporting being online almost constantly. And so I think that really speaks to our need for representation and connection with people that look like us, that share our values and our beliefs. And, you know, when you are a minority in a minority population, you're still seeking that connection, right? And so the internet has, you know, afforded us the ability to do that. But if you look that in comparison to the white teens who are only at 37%, I think that's just really unfortunate. And it kind of reinforces that we have a social need to connect. And when we're not able to get that connection, we're going to find it even at our own, detriment, at our own negative impact of our well-being. And if we look at how this shapes identity formation, the positives, enhancing the connections, and overcoming limits of space and proximity, so that, person that's a member of a minority population in a rural community who's needing that connection. Adolescents report that social media makes them feel more accepted, gives them people to connect with, helps them meet friends across distances. LGBTQ plus youth have gotten into online communities with peers that share their identity and also been connected with role models. Another big part of this with some of these populations is they're not just seeking friends, they're seeking a role model too. And when we look at the negatives, the hindering in the development of empathy and emotional development, that again is very hard because both kids and adults can retreat into the digital space, which makes it hard to foster those in-person interactions. And screen-based communication has been shown to hinder the development of empathy and emotional intelligence because we're not getting those in-person social cues. And so while digital space, like I said, can overcome a lot of barriers, it is still hindering development in a lot of ways.
Brittany?
Yeah, while you were talking about identity formation and connection, someone had asked a question about if there's information on how to counteract the social media impact for kids in foster care, particularly ones who come from dysfunctional families as they search for connections online.
Yeah, I think I can definitely look at our citations and see if I can find anything helpful to that. And that really ties back into that interpersonal safety. People that are vulnerable often have that deficit in interpersonal safety, and someone in foster care has had something interpersonally safe, whether it was a parent or something out of someone's control, and that's putting them at risk. And so they're seeking a connection. And unfortunately, similar to the digital space, sometimes in foster care, our kids get access to a lot of connection, but it's not an authentic connection. It's a connection because that's our role or our job, but it's not an authentic connection. And so they're absolutely right. I mean, our kids do spend a lot of time online seeking at their own detriment and safety to find that connection. So if we look at shaping the self, so social media's role in identity formation, this is where we're going to kind of talk about where these toxic behaviors come from, these things that we see people developing. And so I think, to summarize this and make it a little bit shorter, the online disinhibition effect is when people behave differently online than they would in person. Okay. And that's what we know. We know that happens. And so one of the ways that happens is through the asynchronicity, which is where there's a delay in the messages. So sometimes you communicate and then you don't immediately get a response. And so the emotion that maybe it's assigned to that isn't there anymore as the back and forth exchange takes place. And so then I got to remember how to solipsistic.
I know it's in there phonetically in our notes because it's hard to say.
Is, online communication where people imagine or perceived others' thoughts as their own world since they can't communicate that with them directly. And so that's where we get these really kind of unhealthy connections where we're projecting our emotions onto someone else because they're far away, we can't reach them. And then that disassociative imagination is when people are seeing online interactions as part of like a separate space that's not connected to real world consequences. And that's when people start not being kind to each other.
Yeah. And that's a good kind of segue into cyberbullying. And so, because we're going to talk about kind of cyberbullying and people feeling as though it's not the real world. So what is cyberbullying? Cyberbullying is repeated or inflicted harm through the use of digital technologies. So really this is anything that's sending mean messages, spreading rumors online, posting embarrassing photos or videos that someone wouldn't want posted, leaving someone out of online groups intentionally. I mean, it could go beyond that, but those are kind of the most frequently seen things that we have. And one of the things that's really important to note is that unlike face-to-face bullying, this bullying can happen anytime, any day, any time of day. It can happen at night. And then because of the just general expansiveness of online platforms, it can reach so many people so quickly. And so those things can be even more hurtful and harder to escape. I thought this was really interesting from the Unknown Number documentary. One of the things they were talking about is the app that was being used was just generating new numbers. And so even the concept of like block the number, change the number, like wasn't working. And so just this inability to escape, whereas with traditional bullying, that requires proximity. And so, maybe you are being bullied at school and that's not okay, but when you go home, you're in a safe space. This really cyberbullying really doesn't have those same confines, unless you are like restricted from the technology in some capability. And so what we're seeing kind of as the mental health effect of cyberbullying is really a really large increase in depression and anxiety, an increase in suicidal thoughts, some diagnoses of post-traumatic stress disorder, lower self-esteem. People will withdraw. They will not want to engage in things that they did previously and enjoyed. We might see self-harm or other kind of self-injurious behaviors. And then, of course, there's obviously all of the physical side effects that can come with the increased anxiety or the uneasiness. And a lot of people feel a lot of shame and guilt for being bullied in general. And then for cyberbullying, this is not just happening to you, it's also happening in front of a lot of people. And so there's this extra kind of layer of humiliation, whereas like, if we think back to like old movies, if you get hit in the schoolyard by your bully, there's a few kids around to see that. And that's definitely maybe the talk of what everyone talks about for the next day of school. But when we get bullied online, or when a child gets bullied online, that is happening in front of thousands and thousands of people, potentially, if not more. And so the humiliation and the shame, especially if it is in some sort of public forum, is large.
So when we're talking about cyberbullying, when I was researching this, the concept of like accidental cyberbullying came up, which I thought was really interesting because often, because the digital space is like a ground that really makes it easy to get into these not very kind communication patterns and the way we treat each other. Often kids that are complaining of experiencing cyberbullying may have perpetuated that or may have engaged in that behavior themselves. And so like with this, the intent to hurt is not necessarily there. It wasn't deliberate, but the outcome is still hurtful. And so because online communication lacks social cues and the immediate feedback that you would get in a real life situation. And so, that can come off as like a joke or sarcasm or maybe some light criticism. But because you don't have that in person, read on one another's body language, it can seem hurtful. And so what continues to contribute to these communication patterns are the distance. It makes us feel further away from the responsibility, the group dynamics. So everyone either agreeing with the hurtful comment or disagreeing with it can reinforce it. And then it's normalized. So to a certain degree, unfortunately, like we've normalized that you don't have to be a nice person online. And the memes and the comment threads and the things that people feel really bold to share online versus what they would say in person has reinforced that. And so the best way to support someone is to acknowledge the impact. So that was a big hurt. Whatever it was, it hurt. Kids unfortunately really like social justice. And because of the nature of cyberbullying, we often can't give that to them. So really the best that we can do is validate and apologize that they experienced that and try to help them develop a better sense of interpersonal safety so it doesn't continue, to stay away from those situations. So previously, during, situations involving mistreatment, bullying the spotlight has been on the victim and the bully. However, some recent information indicates that in the digital realm, there are multiple parties playing a different role in concept. So because of the large scale audience, there's this study identified 3 roles that people can play. So there's the assistants, so the people that are actively reinforcing the bully or encouraging them through their likes, comments, chats, what have you. The reinforcers, so those who aren't directly bullying them, but maybe supporting it. So they may be laughing, they may be sharing. And then the bystanders, so the people that are seeing it happen and not saying anything, which could be attributed their silence is, that they're okay with it. And so according to the Child Mind Institute, which is where this research came from, it's important to help your child identify the roles of everyone involved. And that will help them better process the conflict and, reinforce the need, give them the support to break those behavioral patterns.
Understand
So
where
really
they
to
fall.
analyze the situation.
Brittany.
Yeah, just a couple questions about that. Someone wondering about, using the term bullying as opposed to harassment when it really does seem to have crossed the line into harassment. And then someone was asking about addressing suicidal behaviors as a result of cyberbullying. And then we had a request for resources to hand to parents when we're talking about technology usage, if you have anything like that.
Yeah, we'll definitely have some handouts that can be shared.
Yeah, Brittany, would you be able to share that with the registrant list if we worked on putting together some of those
Yeah,
handouts?
absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know.
And then something about cancel culture and its effect on cyberbullying while we're talking about all those things.
And I will, just before we hop into those answers, I will say, just for the essence of time, we might just push our conversation about schools to next week. It fits in really well with what we're talking about next week too, and I don't want to rush our cyberbullying conversation. So if anyone's really disappointed about that, they can reach out to me, and I'm happy to kind of have a one-on-one conversation with you about schools' role in tech-life balance. I promise it's not quite as interesting though as the cyberbullying conversation. So we'll go ahead and plan for that. But when you get the slides, you will see those school involvement in tech-life balance slides.
Thanks, Alex. And we have 8 minutes left.
Awesome. Bethany, I'll let you maybe address, especially the questions around suicidal. I know that that's a area where you've done a lot of studying and responsiveness, but any of those you want to touch on first, and then I can.
Yeah, so I think cancel culture can reinforce that downward social comparison. So in a way, cancel culture has allowed us to validate those emotional experiences and be like, no, it's not okay for you to talk like that. But it's also reinforced us kind of being accidental bullies in our own right. So responding to that bullying kind of with our own bullying or exclusion. And then with with regard to suicide, I've had kids say, I said in the chat I wanted to kill myself and no one said anything. And so I think it's really important to reinforce to your kids we can't go to a space where the communication may be inauthentic to try to communicate an authentic issue. You know what I mean? So that's a real, true, painful, genuine emotion. And when you go to a space like that where people may not be the best citizens, and that's the language that I found when I was doing this research. They talked a lot about being a good digital citizen. And knowing that you may not receive that from peers. And so it's really important just to validate and to remain calm and logistically talk through the situations with them. And just, emphasize everyone's role, what it looked like, but also reinforce that we don't know. That's one of our our barriers, is that we don't know what these other people were thinking. They were in the chat and they didn't say anything, but we don't really know, you know? And so we really can't, we just have to focus on the emotion. I hope that kind of answered the question.
Would you handle, like, if you had a client struggling with suicidality directly as a result of being cyberbullied, would you handle that any differently, or is there any special take that you would have with that situation?
I would really focus on the design, like when we're expressing, you know, when that's happening to us as a result of cyberbullying, are we doing anything from an interpersonal safety standpoint that might be making it worse for ourselves? Not to like blame, but just to like when you were online, like, you know, thinking about when I got into that chat room or I started gaming that day, this is how I was feeling, you know, and kind of helping them process like how they ended up online to begin with, you know, and also help like really talk through like that, the impact. So like, you know, what was it about that mistreatment that was so impactful to you? Was it that it was repetitive? Was it that nobody stood up for you? Like really helping them like digest it piece by piece.
Yeah. And I can speak to kind of, I know someone asked about the difference in bullying and harassment. And so like, I know that the difference in the two for like terminologies has to do with protected class, and the harassment is when we're talking about a protected class. And bullying is when it's more, you know, same thing, but it's not related to a protective class, such as someone's race, gender, identity, etc. And I mean, I don't know that I have a lot to say on that other than I think we should call it what it is. So if someone is saying that they are being bullied, but what they are actually experiencing is harassment, or if someone is downplaying harassment, oh, everybody, like, you know, kids get bullied. Well, this child is being more than bullied, they are being harassed. And I think that as professionals engaging with children and families who are experiencing this, using the correct terminology is probably where I would start with that. I think that a lot of the responses in terms of understanding why it's happening, or like, again, harassment can also have all of these different, the perpetrator, the target, the aid, the acceptant, the reinforcer, the bystanders, all of those things can also happen in, you know, online harassment as well. And so I think the education around the roles is the same. I know that legally there is more you can do in a harassment situation than you can with just bullying. And so I think it's just really being able to identify the difference between the two kind of situations and actions, and then just calling it what it is, and really, I mean, validating the experience. If it is harassment, then it's not bullying, it's harassment. And if it's just bullying, it's not just bullying, it is still something that is profoundly negatively impactful. And so I think that that's kind of my recommendation of those two, is we don't want, I don't think that they should be lumped together. And I also don't think that there should be a world where harassment is necessarily worse than bullying, because they both can have the same detrimental effects. However, in today's world and society, it's important that we acknowledge those protected classes and what other stressors they're experiencing, and why that harassment might have a different impact, would be maybe what I'd say.
With harassment, I think, you know, when you're being bullied, you know, you have a couple of interactions where somebody targeted you and said things with the intent to hurt you, and you logged off, right? And you left the chat, you did whatever, and it stopped. And so harassment's when it goes up a level and it just continues. And so that's then when, you know, there's more legal options available to you. Like if I left this chat and then someone found me and continued this cycle, you know, then that's kind of where harassment in my mind kind of comes in. You know, it's the continued verb, essentially. It continued after you tried to disengage.
Yeah, I'm following the chat, and we do have a law enforcement individual who's explaining that a cop would associate them similarly. They would fall in the same category. And so I do think that's interesting. That's an area I'd have to do a lot more research on, and also probably talk to our legal team about their understandings of what would happen internally if we had those two things happen, and just kind of get to the basis of that. So maybe there aren't different legal options. I may have misspoken there. Maybe that's, you know, a little bit more specific. I still would believe that those things need to be separated though, and that maybe certain things would need to be addressed differently. But that is, I just wanted to make sure that everyone saw that information, because that is interesting. Okay, I think we have, oh, Brittany.
Yeah, we just had one more question. I shared the screensanity.org resource. People were asking for some resources. And someone said, how do you handle a household where social media is not allowed and kids feel like they're the only kids with that rule?
So all of the information that I digested in this process pointed to the fact that we can't have an extinction mindset when it comes to social media and technology. It's not going to go away. And so, help it. I mean, parents have to understand that it's not going to go away. So I think if we extinguish it, we make it go away, in our home, then it's not going to be a problem. But your kids are still stepping out of the home where they're experiencing it. And so and you'll hear this in the next week's webinar, but we really talk a lot about parenting with it, not against it. And all the information that I've read suggests that we parent with it. And so, because they're going to access it. And so when you're supporting a family where they don't have it in the home, helping them understand okay, but they will access it at some point, and so they can access it and develop their own habits, or you can model how you want them to conduct themselves with it. But just getting rid of it and making it go extinct is not, we know they're going to find a way, right? They're going to find it. They're going to access it. And understanding the role that it plays, that we're using it. It's not just for, it's communication, it's connection. Kids don't text. They use Snapchat. They use these alternative forms, right?
Yeah. It was a conversation I was just having, and I think that we found the same place of understanding the risk, finding a protective factor, wanting to protect your child's mental health. I get it. I get wanting to limit the exposure to that addiction cycle, to that dopamine response loop. But I do think that there is a point to be made for building those healthy habits while you still have some level of influence on your child, because at some point you do kind of lose that ability to influence how they see these things and how they operate within them. And so I think the conversation I would have with the children is also maybe exploring, do you really understanding why that limit is there and understanding all of those risks, and maybe starting to have conversations about what those healthy habits could look like. I don't know what a parent's decision would be, obviously, whether or not to change some of the restrictions in their home. But I think I would say starting with that education and understanding both at the parent level, but also at the child level, this is why this restriction exists in your home. This is what these risks are, and this is what would have to happen, or what will have to happen when you do get access to them, whether that's in this home or as an adult, in order to stay healthy. Okay, I know that is kind of our time for today. I did put up our last slide about cyberbullying, which just has kind of our things to do as a caregiver if a child reports cyberbullying to you, and then also what we can encourage the child to do and empower the child to do in those situations. I really hope a lot of you guys are able to join us next week. These are very connected webinars, and I really think we're going to round a lot of things out. Like I said, we'll touch on that school tech-life balance as well as quite a few other topics. And so, yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for everyone. This is a hard conversation. This is a new conversation because technology is constantly changing. So we were glad you guys were here.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Sorry, I'm long-winded. I could go on about this forever.
No,
I appreciate you joining us today.
All right, you all should be getting, when you leave, it'll pop up, say, take the survey, please do that. You also get an email with a link to the survey, and about an hour, you'll get an email to the recording as well as a link to the slides. I'm going to drop again in the chat. If you're having trouble accessing the survey or the slides, please email me and I will help you. Rhonda, I did see your question about screen time. Please feel free to join us next week. We're going to talk a little bit more about healthy screen habits, so hopefully that will help you as well. I'm going to hang out in here for about 2 more minutes. If anyone has a question, please feel free to type that in the chat. The survey will come to your email as well. Yeah, if it didn't pop up for you, no worries. The survey will come to an email. You do have to complete the survey to get your certificate. So make sure when you're completing that survey, you type your email address in correctly. I do try to catch as many as I can if that happens, but I will be checking that email, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in the chat again. So if you have any questions about the survey or slides, please contact me there. And then if you're interested in the next week's event, that link will also come to you with the survey email. So you're going to get 2 emails after today, one with the survey and next week's link, and one with the slides and the recording. All right, you all have me for 1 more minute. Thanks for being here, Anika. Appreciate that. Lavita, if you're still having issues, please feel free to email me and I'll do my best to help you. My email address is at the bottom of that message. But I see folks are already, I can see the responses coming in. Awesome. The survey email might take just a little bit. It waits till we're all done with the webinar, so it might come in an hour or so at the most. Okay, again, you're going to get 2 emails this afternoon, both probably within an hour or so. Those emails will come from Zoom or Camber webinars. So be looking for those. The first email is going to have the recording and the slides. So the second email is going to have the survey link, and that survey gets you your CEU. And that email will also have the link for next week's if you haven't registered for next week's webinar. If you're leaving an email address in the chat for me, I'm not going to be able to do anything, but I will put my email address in there and you can email me. I do not email certificates. The certificates are populated based on the evaluation you complete. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this out for today. Thank you all so much for your time. It was great to see all of you here, and thanks for your questions and your participation.